Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday here at the Northeast Georgia History Center. Have a fantastic program for you today. Something we've gotten some requests for. Folks want to know more about World War II, and a couple of folks said, well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Navy? Great idea. We love the U.S. Navy in World War II here at the Northeast Georgia History Center. It is a fascinating service, and so many of those men and women who served in the Navy in World War II deserve our utmost respect because they are the ones who took on a lot of the role in the Pacific, especially against Japan, but also in the Atlantic. And that's the thing. You have to remember, what is a Navy? A Navy is a fighting force that consists of ships on the ocean. So wherever the ocean is, you want to have your ships there to fight, to attack, to defend. And the better your ships are, the bigger your ships are, the better you're going to do in battle. And you need good men and good women, well-trained, to be on those ships. You want the best sailors in the world, and that's certainly what the United States Navy was in World War II. Now today, I'm not going to go through the entire campaigns of the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the other areas around the globe that the Navy fought in. I sort of want to just tell you a little bit about some of their uniforms, some of their equipment, and some of their experiences. When the war began, unlike the Army, which was in the United States very, very small and hadn't really expanded for the war yet, the Navy was already pretty big. The United States had been keeping a pretty good-sized Navy comparatively compared to other nations for most of its history since a little bit before World War I. This is a great way, as we say, to project your nation's power. You can project power with your Navy everywhere you sail on the ocean. And it's not just having the big ships that can fight, that can actually shoot guns or send aircraft. You have to have ships that can support those ships, the supply ships, the repair ships. You also have to have bases. If you don't have those supply ships and those support ships and those bases, it doesn't matter how big or how good your fleet is, it can't go very, very far from the shores of your country. So that's one of the things the United States, it had a lot of different bases, and that's one of the things that Japan attacked in the early part of the war in December of 41 and January and February of 1942. They wanted to remove those bases so that the United States Navy could use to resupply and to refit as they went further and further to attack the Japanese. Now, as the war goes on, the United States Navy expands even larger, and by the end of the war, it becomes the absolute largest Navy in the world. And the way it fights the war turns out to be very different from the way naval engagements had been fought before. In the past, all the way back to the days of wooden hulls and sails, ships had lined up with cannons and sort of shot at each other with their cannons, with their guns, and even when ships began to evolve into steel ships with larger and larger guns, they still sort of fought this way. They would use the big guns to shoot at the other ship and penetrate the hull and perhaps blow up part of the ship. Right before World War II happened, some different things started to change, and a lot of people didn't accept the idea at first that you could have a Navy war without the big guns, without those battleships. But of course, we have a new weapon in World War II in the Navy, the aircraft carrier and airplanes. Air power is going to determine the course of the war, especially in the Pacific, but to a certain extent in the Atlantic as well. So they begin to develop ways to fight in the air from the Navy. And so they have to develop the aircraft carriers, these big ships that can carry those airplanes. If we can go to, I think it's aircraft carrier fleet. Yes, let me step to the side. What you see here is basically a fleet at sail, and the ship at the very front is one of the Essex-class aircraft carriers. These are the biggest aircraft carriers in the world at the time, and the United States had a good many of these, about, I want to say 10 or 12 of these they had developed. And I want you to look and see how many aircraft can fit on the top of that aircraft carrier. It's got a big flat deck that serves as the airfield. That's where the airplanes take off from and land. And immediately underneath that, which you can't see in this picture or from anywhere outside the ship, is a big deck, the hangar deck, almost as big as the flight deck, where those airplanes are stored, where they're maintained, where they're fueled up and things like that. And there are elevators on the side I think there's one right there. There's sort of one right there too that take the aircraft up and down. And these airplanes are of three types. There are fighters that provide air cover and shoot down other enemy airplanes. There are torpedo bombers, which zoom along, and their goal is to get close to the water and send a torpedo into the side of an enemy ship. So they have to go close to the water and aim their airplane at that ship and knock a hole in the side of the torpedo. And then there are dive bombers. The dive bombers go very high up. They point their plane at their target, another enemy ship, and they literally dive at the ship to aim the bomb. And then they release the bomb, and then they have to pull up like this. Those are the three main types of aircraft that these aircraft carriers are going to use. And of course, the difference is, and the advantage is with an aircraft carrier, is that you have the range to hit your enemy that is the range of the aircraft, right? Those big guns, those big battleship guns, sometimes they're, this big around, they're huge, and they can shoot 2, 3, 4, 8 miles. But that's not nearly as far as one of these airplanes can go. Some of these airplanes can fly 100, 150 miles and come back and find the enemy fleet. So in World War II, you have one of the first battles, actually the first battle, where the fleets never saw each other, the Battle of the Coral Sea. That it was primarily aircraft from one fleet, from the American fleet and the Japanese fleet, sort of passing each other and then going to attack the enemy fleets and the enemy aircraft carriers. And in the Pacific, even the war, even the land war that the Marines and the Army were involved in was mostly about going to take different islands that could serve as air bases, and you could have airplanes with an even longer range set up on those bases. Now, the sailors who were on these ships, right? Not everyone was on a combat ship. Some folks were on different kinds of ships. Let's pull up, I think it's combat ships. I want to talk a little bit about those. So you see up here you have a battleship, which is the old-fashioned big gun ships. You have an aircraft carrier down here that makes those planes, gives them somewhere to take off and land from. And then you have some of these other smaller ones. You have cruisers and frigates and things like that, whose job is to go and perhaps attack some of the other enemy ships with their guns. And then you have here a destroyer. Destroyer is really, their job is to find enemy submarines and to protect the aircraft carriers from enemy airplanes. How do other ships do that? We'll get to that in a second. And then some of these smaller ships down here are also going to provide some fighting power. Now, a lot of those ships are going to need, actually all those ships are going to need fuel, they're going to need ammunition, they're going to need food for the crews, they're going to need all kinds of things, and this is a very important part of the Navy. You don't necessarily think about this, but it's incredibly important. If we can go to the one with support ships, there are a lot of different support ships that they're going to need. They're going to have ships whose main job is a hospital ship. They're going to have ships whose job is to provide fuel to other ships. They're going to have ships whose job it is to provide gas, like this one here. And this one here provides ammunition and things like that. They even make little small versions of aircraft carriers that can take replacement airplanes to and from the larger aircraft carriers. They're basically like a little bus. Instead of people, though, they're carrying airplanes. So the U.S. Navy has hundreds and hundreds of ships of all sizes, and it has to train these men how to use them, how to sail them. And of course, we're not using sails by this point. We're using big, usually diesel engines. We're even past the days of coal. And those diesel engines take a lot of fuel that has to be replaced. And so everyone on a ship has a different job. They may be in charge of working on the engines. They may be cooks. They may be someone who works on the airplanes, who fuels the airplanes. There may be carpenters. These big steel ships still have to have carpenters. There are crews called damage control. Their job, if their ship is hit or damaged, they immediately have to go and put the fires out to fix the holes in the hull, to repair any damage, because as soon as you can get your damage repaired, that means your ship's going to be safe and it's going to be able to get back into action. Now, behind me, I have some of the things that a sailor may use. Now, how did you get the folks into the Navy? there were a few different ways. Of course, during World War II, there was a lot of patriotism where people wanted to join the Navy, and they did. Maybe they didn't want to be in the infantry in the Army. Maybe they didn't want to be in the Marines or the Air Force. They wanted to go to sea because the sea is a beautiful place, and a lot of people joined the Navy. And they had different ways of enticing people to join the Navy. They had a couple of different brochures. We have one here. What kind of job can you get in the Navy? So this brochure is basically saying if you come into the Navy, we can teach you a trade, we can educate you about a lot of different things that you'll definitely want to use in the Navy, but you may want to use after the war is over as a job. And then there's this classic, right? Men make the Navy, and the Navy makes men. This is appealing to that idea that if you join the military, if you join the Navy, they'll make a man out of you. Now, there were women who served in the Navy too, and we'll also get to them in just a second. So people join the Navy for a lot of different reasons, and they go to a boot camp, and they learn just the basics of how to be a sailor, how to swim, how to salute, how to use their uniforms, how to tie knots, how to work on ships, and then from there, they're going to get taught different jobs. Not everyone is actually going to sea or to serve on a ship. Some people may not even mostly be sailors. There's a big part of the Navy that's involved in the invasions of islands, or even at D-Day, right? The soldiers, the men, the equipment have to get from the ocean onto the beach so they can continue their fight on land. It's the Navy's job to do that, and they had amphibious forces that helped do that with lots of different ships that could roll up onto the beach and ramps would drop down and soldiers would run out. And these amphibious operations became a big, big part of what the Navy did. Now, there was a fella who volunteered here at the Northeast Georgia History Center for years. He was on the board. He did a lot of different things, and his name was Marvin Losey. And Marvin was a World War II veteran, and he was one of those amphibious warriors. Let's pull his picture up and show everyone a picture of Marvin. Look at this kid, right? This was taken in 1945, just when he got out of boot camp for the Navy. And I have here, this right here is Marvin's uniform that he donated to us. So this is something I want to tell everyone. If you have a chance to talk to a World War II vet, or if you have a chance to talk to anyone who was in the Navy, that's a great way to learn about what it's like to be in the Navy, what sort of experiences they had, what they learned from it, what they didn't learn from it. So a little sidebar I want to give you is always take time to talk to folks who might have amazing stories and amazing experiences that might teach you about something. But I just wanted to share that story about someone here who meant a lot to us and continues to mean a lot to us, who did serve his country doing one of those important roles. Now, there were lots of other jobs in the Navy too. And one of the things that everybody did when it was time to go into battle is they had battle stations, right? And when they went to battle stations, every person on a ship, no matter how big or small the ship is, has a specific job. Now, right now, I'm sort of dressed in just sort of everyday work gear for the Navy. You may be thinking of those blue uniforms like Marvin's here with a neckerchief tie. That's for dress occasions. That's not usually at all in World War II what they would wear on the ship. I have very, very comfortable. I've just got on a pair of denim jeans. I have on a cotton chambray shirt over a white t-shirt. I've got in this classic Dixie cup cap and just a comfortable pair of leather shoes. And this is the working uniform of sailors. Now, when they're going into battle stations, they may need certain and special types of equipment. One of the first things they're going to do is if they're on the deck, they're still going to put on a helmet, right? Why in the world would someone need a helmet standing on a ship? Is the Navy ship going to send one of those big shells and try and kill you? Not exactly. We'll get to why in a second. One of the other things that they're going to have to do is put on their life preserver, right? You see a lot of these, and this is a big, bulky thing. It's filled with a substance called kapok, right? And it's a natural substance that is a great flotation device. So I'm going to tie this up here, but as I tie it up, I want y'all to notice something about it. You see how it's big and fluffy on the front, but not so much on my back except around my neck, right? So the reason that is that when I fall into the water with this, I may be unconscious, I may be wounded, and I might not be able to swim. So when I go into the water, this is going to allow me to float like this. It's going to pull me up, face up, out of the water, and this big bulbous part on this is it's going to keep me floating, right, so that I can still breathe. I'm not going to go down. So this is an important part. It's a little bulky. Like I said, it's kind of poof, right, poofy. But this is something that I'm going to have to wear in case something happens, in case I get blown off the side of the ship, in case my ship sinks. I'm going to be able to continue floating. So I've got my helmet, I've got my KPOC, my life preserver on. Let's say today that I'm going to be working on one of those guns that attack the enemy. Most ships in World War II that are escorting those aircraft carriers are not going to shoot at other ships. They're going to be shooting in the sky at the enemy aircraft, and they have a lot of different a lot of different types of guns that can do that. One of them is this big 3-inch shell. Now, Libba had said, whoa, when I walked into the room with this, but it's funny, you should know that this is actually one of the smaller guns on a Navy ship. This isn't even a real round. This is a wooden round. This is a dummy, and this is what they would use to train folks to load those guns. Remember that picture I showed you before? Maybe this Navy will make a man out of me, I don't know. But this is big and heavy to teach those guys how to load the guns quick. This is a little bit smaller. This is a 40 millimeter shell, and they used to fire lots and lots of these. There were crews that served on guns that would just go ba-boom, ba-boom, and they would fire a lot of these. Let's go to the Bofors gun.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, you can see here, I'm kind of dressed like some of these guys. They don't have their life preserver on. They're a little braver than I am. But you see they've got those 4 barrels, right? And each one of those barrels can fire at a different time. And you see these guys here, see there and there, they're putting these rounds into that gun, and they're trying to shoot down enemy aircraft, right? And they're all getting direction from a main area in the ship, and those guns are just trying to shoot down any of those airplanes so they don't sink the big ship or they don't sink you. Now this happened in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. So when all those shells are going up into the air all over the fleet, right? Thousands and thousands of anti-aircraft rounds. What is one of the main rules of physics, guys? What goes up must come down, right? So when things come down, they're going to be dropping all over where the fleet is. That's why I need to wear this helmet, not to protect me from someone shooting at me, but to protect me from all those little pieces of shell and flak that are going to be falling from the sky and hit me in the head. You saw those guys in the picture. They may not have this on, but they all had a helmet on because that is a real, real danger. Someone else who's going to work those guns, you may have seen him. Like I said, everyone's working on that gun trying to aim it and keep it fed with ammunition except for one guy, the talker, because he's the one who's going to be getting direction from the central control area telling you where the enemy airplanes are to fire the guns. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this off. Notice how quick I can take this off in case I need to, because it's not just water that you have to worry about on a ship. It's fire, which is what those damage control crews are about. But the person running that may have to talk to someone, so each person in one of those gun crews and at a lot of different places around the ship are going to be the communicator or the talker. And each place on a ship has something that looks like this. So this can go around, and this will lock on. See if I can find it. Like this, there we go. And then I'm able to put these earphones on, right? Now, that means this looks weird because I've got this thing right here in front of my face. But why is that? Right? It's so that my hands can still be free and I can still use this to talk and I can still hear things. So these things are going to be used all over the ship. They're called voice-powered. they actually don't take electricity. They'll plug into a part of the ship, right? This is a weird plug. You probably haven't seen one like that. But they plug in at different points on the ship, and you can communicate. So I have earphones on, and so even though if there's sounds of battle and things and the big guns going off, I'm still able to hear the commands, and I'm still able to talk, even though I'm still using my hands for stuff. But what about that stuff falling from the sky? Well, if I go to put my helmet on, it doesn't quite work with these earphones, right? So I'm not able to use this helmet. So the Navy develops a special helmet, this big goofy thing here called a talker helmet. And this goes over those earphones perfectly. So I'm able to see this, so you can see how big this helmet is. But that way the earphones still work just great. I can still talk with this thing. I can still use my hands to work on the gun, right? And I'm still protected from the things falling out of the sky. Now, this helmet is actually, like most of the stuff that you see today, is an original. Here's an interesting thing on this helmet. I don't know if you can see that big dent. That dent probably came from something falling out of the sky during a battle somewhere. I don't know. I wish this helmet could tell a story, because I bet it would have an amazing story to tell. Now, I just told you a little bit. I'll take my equipment off here. I just told you a little bit about one job that a sailor has. How does a sailor know what their job's going to be and how they're going to take care of things? During boot camp, they get something called the Blue Jackets Manual, right? And I've got two different versions here. And inside the Blue Jackets Manual is theoretically everything you're going to need to know about a sailor, from how to fold your uniforms, to how to march in formation, to how to tie knots, to how to eat, where to eat, lots of different things. And this is the Blue Jackets manual from 1940, right? So that's before we got into World War II. This is one from 1943, when we're smack dab in the middle of the war. I want you to look at something and pay attention. See how much thicker the wartime version is? They began to realize that there were a lot of new things that a Navy sailor needed to know to fight in this new war, right? It is an old adage that someone is going to prepare to fight the last war. And that's what this Blue Jackets manual is all about. They're getting ready from the lessons they had learned in World War I and before, the things they think a sailor might need to know. Now, they've got this bigger book with a lot of different things. What's new in this new book? Well, it's not just tying knots with ropes, it's how to splice steel cable. It's how to put out fires with new firefighting equipment and use oxygen masks and tanks to do that. It's talking about how to work on aircraft, how to watch out when aircraft are being operated on an aircraft carrier that you may be working on. Lots of new information these sailors need that they're not necessarily going to have in those old manuals. So as big as the Navy is, it takes hundreds and thousands of men to join the Navy and do all that fighting. Well, like I said, not everyone in the Navy is going to serve on a ship. There's still a lot of jobs to do at the naval bases and in the docks and the ports and things like that. But if you also need men to be out on those ships, you're going to start to run out of men eventually, because you need a lot of people for the United States fighting abilities in World War II. So if all the men are being used up and we need to find someone else to do the job, what could we do? Maybe we could turn to some women, right? And this is something the United States in World War II does a fantastic job of, right? They're able to mobilize women during the war to a scale that had never been seen in the United States, and quite frankly had never been seen in the world up to that point. We've already seen in one of our past programs about Rosie the Riveter, how they were able to bring women into the factories to make all the stuff, the tanks, the planes, the ships, for the men to fight with. But they also needed women to help out and take some of the jobs so that men could go off and fight in those battles. And the Army had the WWII, the Women's Army Corps, but the Navy has the WAVES, W-A-V-E-S, women accepted for volunteer emergency service. Now, I want to show you, I showed you some of the recruiting books for the men. Let me show you this poster, or a copy of a poster from World War I. Right? Can you see that? Gee, I wish I were a man. I'd join the Navy. Well, when World War II comes, they don't have to wish they were a man. They can join the Navy as a woman. And here are a couple of great books. And they're both recruiting with The Story of You in Navy Blue and The Waves and the Spars. So the Waves were the Navy version of women who joined, and the Spars were the ones who joined the Coast Guard. They got their own set of uniforms. They got their own boot camps. They got their own officers. And we have here a really neat uniform that was worn by a Wave. And you can see it's obviously different from a man's. It has, you could say, a more feminine touch because they were designed to be attractive to women. They wanted them to be fashionable so that women wouldn't be ashamed or wouldn't be disappointed in having to wear what they would consider a frumpy man's uniform. So they designed uniforms specifically for women, and they are pretty sharp looking. And this particular one, I don't know if you can see it, but everyone has a ratings badge, right? Marvin's uniform has an amphibious patch because he worked in the amphibious forces. She has a rating badge, and her rating badge says that she, let's see if I can turn this here. If you can see that, she is an aviation machinist mate. That means she works on aircraft engines. So there were a lot of women that were taken in to do a lot of, and they were important, secretarial jobs and clerks and things like that, but they also pulled women in to do a lot of those physical jobs, just like Rosie, that a lot of people thought maybe they couldn't do until the war came. And then they saw that they were able to do the same work and contribute just as much to the war effort. One other thing that I want to show you, then we'll get to questions. The Navy is a very interesting service. They have a lot of traditions that go back hundreds of years that makes them unique. A lot of the Army, the Air Force, they don't have as long a tradition as the Navy does. And here's a very interesting one. So when a sailor crosses the equator, they get a special ceremony and are inducted into the kingdom of Neptune, right? And so when it's called getting their papers. The first time you go across the equator, they have this weird ceremony. If you can talk to anyone who's in the Navy, talk to them about it. I can't go into it here. Let me see if I can get this a little closer. And they have these really neat certificates that are kind of nonsense. This is not anything formal or official in the Navy. This is just something the men do amongst themselves. And they'll have all these ceremonies where they have to crawl across the deck and cover themselves in tar and agree to serve the king of the sea, Neptune, for all of their life because he's granted them safe passage across the equator. Lots of interesting stuff, but that's the way tradition works in the Navy. That's why these uniforms go back a couple of hundred years in design, because that's tradition. That's why even today they still wear this kind of cap. It's not even practical anymore. It's just the uniform you wear. So the U.S. Navy in World War II was a very unique blend of tradition and old seamanship and good leadership, coupled with a lot of new technologies and way to fight on a global scale. Now, with all that being said, Lib, I can only anticipate that we have a lot of questions we need to get to.
Yes, so for our younger audience, can you just briefly explain how World War II began?
Sure. Yeah, so for the younger folks and the folks who may not know, how did World War II begin? Let me see if I can sum this up very short. So Germany and Japan became very aggressive, very powerful dictator governments. That means one person or a small group of people got in charge and they wanted to conquer everyone else and make the world their way. And then other countries stood up to this, like Great Britain and the United States and the Soviet Union and France, and they began to fight. Now, the United States at first was not involved until the Japanese attacked our main naval base in the Pacific, Pearl Harbor, on December 7th, 1941. After that attack, the United States not only declared war against Japan, but it declared war against Germany as well. And so we continued fighting from then all the way up until Germany surrenders in May of 1945, and Japan surrenders in September of 1945. So in a nutshell, that's how World War II happened.
All right. How many ships were there in the U.S. Navy during this time?
I don't know the exact numbers, but it depends on how you count it. Do you mean all ships? Do you mean combat ships? Do you mean some of the small support craft that may not officially be called a ship? Those would only be called boats. The U.S. Navy had thousands and thousands and thousands of ships, depending upon which ones you count. But, you know, I know they had, like I said, they had about 12 to 15 of the large carriers.
Yeah, over almost 7,000.
Yeah, 7,000 ships in the U.S. Navy in World War II, which gives you some kind of idea about how much we were able to mobilize our industry to build that many ships. Now, that doesn't mean 7,000 aircraft carriers or battleships, but that means ships of all sizes. Most of those are probably support ships or transport ships. Those are easier to build, they're quicker to build. A ship like an aircraft carrier, like an Essex-class aircraft carrier, could take 2.5 years to build in total.
And can you talk about the ship behind you, the USS Missouri?
Yes. So the ship behind me is the USS Missouri. This is one of the big battleships that the United States built after it got into World War II. It is the second largest type of battleship in the world. The largest was by the Japanese, the Yamato class. They only built 2 of those. They were beyond gigantic. But the one behind me is very famous because it is on the decks of this ship that the Japanese formally surrendered and signed the surrender documents to the United States on September 2nd, 1945. And it continued to be used as a fighting vessel for a couple of decades after that. And then it was mothballed. It was sort of put into storage. It was brought back out, believe it or not, during Desert Storm and in the 1980s. And now it has been turned permanently, we hope, into a national monument, and you can actually go there. It's in Pearl Harbor. It's actually right next to where the USS Arizona was sunk. And you can see these big guns behind me. Like I said, those are very, very big. Those are 16-inch guns. So the shell that those fire is about this big around. It stands about this tall, and it weighs as much as a small car. And it can fire that thing 12 miles.
Do we know how many ships were sunk? Maybe U.S. ships?
Yeah, I don't know how many ships were sunk, how many United States ships were sunk. The bigger ones tend to, of course, make headlines, and it's not that our ships were invulnerable, and it's not that our numbers assured us victory. You have to remember that even though we're fighting against the Japanese Navy, the German Navy, those are very good ships, and they're manned by very, very effective leaders and very, very effective sailors.
Looks like over 1,500.
Over 1,500 of the U.S. ships were sunk. Now, again, that doesn't mean they're all battleships. There's a lot of merchant ships and transport ships, and a lot of those were either in action, fighting against other fleets, or maybe they were those merchant ships sunk by German U-boats, for example.
How many ships models were there?
The question is, how many models of ship were there? Hundreds. There were absolute hundreds because the U.S. Navy, as I said, was able to take advantage of America's industrial capacity to design and build. So they were able to create a lot of specific ships for a lot of specific tasks. I'll give you one weird anecdote. There were 2 ships in the Pacific Fleet. Actually, let me back up. I need to tell you that during World War II, one of the great delicacies for a sailor on a ship was ice cream, because sailors are always able to eat better than guys who fight on land. Guys who fight on land are always having to move across the territory. They're having to hide. They're having to sleep in barns or on the ground in the rain. They don't have access to a kitchen every day. Aboard a ship, you do have access to real kitchens every single day. So in the Navy, you're able to eat great, right? And you're able to get treats like ice cream. Sailors loved ice cream, to the point that there were 2 ships in the U.S. Navy whose only job was to make ice cream and deliver ice cream to other ships in the fleet. So there were a lot of different kinds of ships.
Did every kind of ship have some kind of weapon?
During World War II, yes. Almost every single ship, every single Navy ship had some type of weapon. Now, that may be as small as one of these 3-inch guns that I was talking about. That's about as small as a actual gun would be. Most of them also had a couple of anti-aircraft guns. Maybe not as big as this 40 millimeter, but maybe just like a 50 caliber machine gun. But even the merchant ships, even the supply ships would be armed with multiple guns and multiple anti-aircraft guns to protect themselves from attack.
All right. Did women ever fight or rise in the ranks?
So the question is, did women ever fight or rise in the ranks? Let me take the easy one first. They certainly did rise in the ranks. So the waves specifically consisted of enlisted and officer female. So there were a lot of female officers in the waves, and up to and including, captains and commodores. So they continued to rank because it was segregated by gender. Men and women didn't serve in the same units. So within those women's units, there were certainly women who continued to be promoted and be promoted. And that's one of the great things about the U.S. military is they tend to promote based on merit. Did they ever actually fight? Not on purpose. It was never U.S. policy or training or procedure to put women into combat roles in World War II. So some of them may have found themselves, for example, on a hospital ship being attacked. If it was a Navy nurse, she certainly could have lost her life. There are some women who did lose their lives in the line of duty in World War II, but those were not purposeful. They were non-combatants.
Okay. Other than ice cream, what was the best part about being on a ship?
The question is, what was the best part about being on a ship? You're probably going to get a different answer with each person that you ask. And the veterans that I've interviewed, I think a lot of them just liked not being in the infantry. They liked not being constantly under attack, right? You get to sleep in a bed. You get cooked meals at least twice a day. There is always hot coffee. And you get to go into port. You're not always on that front line. So a lot of the guys I talked to really did enjoy that sort of thing. And there wasn't a lot of free time. They always tried to keep folks busy. But also talking to vets, you have to understand that when combat happens on a ship, unlike combat on land, you can always get in a foxhole and you can hide. When you're on a ship, there are a lot of different enemy firing at your ship. Your ship can sink, your ship can burn, your ship can explode, and you can't run away from that because you're in the middle of the ocean. When you're in a battle on a fleet in a ship, you're there. And you have to you can't hide, you can't get away from it, you can't not take part. You have to be there doing something with your ship.
Why was the sailor cap called a Dixie cup?
Oh, that's a good question. So why was this called a Dixie cup? Some of you older folks watching will be able to come along with me, but you younger folks, there used to be you used to be able to get small paper cups to drink out of, and a popular brand, a popular company that made those small cups was called Dixie. And so those Dixie cups actually kind of, they kind of looked like this. They had a big wide thing and they would come down. And so see how that kind of looks like a cup. And the Dixie company made those cups, and they came to be known as Dixie cups. And so when these guys started getting these hats, that's just what they would call them. And if you can fold this up, this is one thing that, again, Navy tradition says that as long as they have their cover on, as long as they have their cap on, they can wear it almost any way they want. They can fold it any way they want. You'll see pictures of sailors from World War II. They've got it like this. They've got it like this. They've got it like this all the time, right? They've got it like this. As long as it's on their head, they have the leeway to wear it in a particular style. So that's one reason that this has come to be seen as like the symbol of the Navy, of the sailor.
Okay, can you talk about the green helmet on the desk?
Yes. So that's a good question. So I have this one too. This is a very specific type of helmet. It's exactly like this one. It's the exact same model, but you'll notice it's painted differently. So this one is painted sort of a battleship gray. That blends in with the deck of the ship and the side of the ship. It just, not even to necessarily camouflage you, but just to make it look like it belongs in the Navy. Some of those amphibious forces that I was talking about, they're the guys who are going to be driving those assault craft up onto the beach. When they get to the beach, they're the guys who are going to be controlling where those ships go, getting the supplies off those ships, and getting them moved inland. So they would have maybe a different kind of helmet, because this is the exact same kind of helmet that a soldier is going to use, that an infantryman in the Army or the Marines is going to have. So to make it stand out as something different, it can't be that, because that doesn't say anything. It can't be green like the infantryman, so they put a couple of different marks. So it has USN up here on front, so everyone who sees this guy knows that that's not an Army, that's not a Marine, he's in the Navy. And this band is going to tell him that he's part of the amphibious team that's helping get the men and the supplies from the ships into the battle on the land. So that's what this particular helmet is. And you saw a lot of these helmets. This one's painted up specifically like the 2nd Naval Beach Battalion at Utah Beach on D-Day.
All right. Liam, who is 7, wants to know what kind of planes did they have on the ships? And I have a picture of U.S. Navy and USMC planes.
Yeah, let's go ahead and pull that picture up. So the question is, what kind of planes did they have on the aircraft carriers? Which I'm not a very good weatherman. Y'all have to excuse me. So, here we've got an F-4U Corsair. That's sort of a multi-purpose. You could use that to bomb targets or to fight in the air if you needed to. This was mostly used by the Navy. The Navy guys love this. Over here, we have a fighter. So those don't carry bombs or torpedoes. Their job is to fly and protect the other planes from enemy aircraft, to protect the fleet from any enemy aircraft, and to dogfight those other enemy aircraft, those other fighters. Here we have, I believe that's is that a torpedo bomber? No, that's a, yes, okay, so here is a torpedo bomber, and down here is a dive bomber. And again, the torpedo bomber carries a torpedo underneath it. That's a big one. It's very similar to what a submarine will shoot, and it goes along the surface of the ocean, and it aims itself at the enemy ship, and then it lets the torpedo go. The torpedo goes into the water, and in a straight line propels itself towards the enemy ship and hopefully hits it and explodes. Those dive bombers are going to be flying high up in the air, and then they're going to see the enemy. They're going to take and aim their airplane and dive at the enemy ship and then pull up just as they release the bomb, so that bomb is going to be aimed by the dive and hopefully also hit the enemy ship. So those are, generally speaking, the three types of planes an aircraft carrier is going to have. But some of those carriers also have Navy airplanes like that F-4U that are going to be focused on attacking land targets where the Marines are landing.
All right. Which country lost the most soldiers or fighters?
What country lost the most soldiers or fighters? Oh, probably. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, probably the Soviet Union. In terms of just soldiers and lives lost, the Soviet Union lost about anywhere from 10 to 20 million people during the course of the war. The United States did not lose nearly that many. I think we lost, 258,000 killed, something like that. And that's sort of what war is. You have to fight the enemy, and what you're trying to do is deplete and make them use up their resources, their men, their material, their planes, their ships, their tanks, and use them up while you still have some left. That's what warfare at its most basic is.
What is that light-looking thing.
So I didn't
One
talk.
behind you, too.
I didn't talk about that. So I have a couple of different versions of flashlight, or lamps, as the British call them, torches. So, being on a ship, they would have these at different places in the ship. The ship hallways would be lit if the engines were going, but if the engines went out, if there was damage that prevented electricity from getting places, they're going to have bulkhead lights like these hanging everywhere over the ship. So if the lights go out, you can grab one off the wall, turn it on, and you're going to have this big, heavy-duty lamp. It's even got a little thing right back here that clips on to places on the wall so that you can take that with you. You can clamp it on the wall, see what you're doing. This is a smaller one. This is a sort of a damage control specific flashlight. And we'll get a little closer. See it has US in here. But you can tell it's made of plastic. It's made of Bakelite. And it actually doesn't have any steel parts on the outside that could spark, because if you're working on a ship that's been damaged, there may be fuel, diesel fuel or aircraft fuel flowing about, and you don't want that to catch on fire. But you're still going to need to see, so you're going to take something like this that's not going to cause a spark if you drop it on a deck or scrape it on a metal wall. It's going to be nice and safe so that it doesn't cause a fire or an explosion.
Samuel, who is 8, wants to know, why were so many naval ships at Pearl Harbor?
A good question. Why were so many ships, why were so many U.S. ships at Pearl Harbor? Pearl Harbor was the main base for the United States Pacific Fleet in the Pacific. It was an island area that had deep water very close to land. You know how you've probably been to a beach where you start walking out into the ocean and it's a nice, slow, sandy beach, and you could go way, way out and still not be above here. That's not what you want for a ship. You want a place for a ship where the land kind of comes down and then right when it gets to the water goes like this. So those ships can pull up close to the land or close to the docks that you build. Pearl Harbor was a great place for that. It was a great natural port, and it was far enough out from the continental United States that those ships would be able to get to the proposed enemy, such as Japan, sooner than if they left from the western part of the United States. So as a result, they built a very big Navy base there with lots of fuel tanks, lots of docks, lots of repair facilities, and as a result, it's sort of, you can imagine it sort of as the parking lot for the U.S. Navy in the Pacific. So that's where the ships would go to just kind of stay, and a lot of them were parked when the Japanese attacked.
What were kitchens and facilities like on a ship?
Oh, the question is, what were kitchens and those facilities like on a ship? I apologize, I should have pulled up a picture of one of those. So these kitchens, it's a lot like your kitchen, only the appliances are gigantic. Right? They have very, you may have a mixer, you may have mixed cake mix or bread mix or something like that. They have those, but they're about this big around, right? And their grills and their ovens are gigantic because they're cooking food for a lot of men. And the bigger the ship, the bigger those kitchens are going to be. In the ships, by the way, they're called galleys, which goes all the way back to for hundreds of years, that I won't bore you with the etymology of the word. But those kitchens are going to have cooks that are assigned to them, whose job it is, their only job in the Navy, is to cook food for everyone. Just like when you prepare a meal at home, you have to get all of your ingredients together, you have to mix them up, you have to prepare them, you cook them, and then you set them out, and your family comes and eats the meal. And of course, at the end of the meal, what is it time for? You have to clean everything up. Well, the process is the same, only they're having to do it for hundreds and hundreds of men. So basically, as soon as you get the meal cooked and you get it served and you get it cleaned up, because it takes so long to do that, it's pretty much time to start the next meal. And they also, like I said, kept coffee going constantly. The Navy almost ran on coffee, and that's the one thing that a sailor could count on wherever he was.
How were ships named?
Question is, how are ships named? A lot of different ways. During World War II, with so many ships to name, we had a great opportunity. Generally speaking, battleships were named for states. So, that's why we have the USS Arizona, the USS Missouri, the USS Iowa, the USS Texas. Those are battleships named for states. Those cruisers, those somewhat smaller than a battleship, are usually named for cities, like the USS Augusta or the USS Atlanta or the USS San Francisco, places like that. The destroyers were usually named for famous, usually, but not always, named for famous or brave sailors and captains from United States naval history, like Farragut and Fletcher and folks like that. And then some of the other ships would just be named after smaller towns and things like that. They might be named after a famous senator or a famous person from history. One of the big aircraft carriers was named the USS Franklin after Benjamin Franklin, and it was hit by enemy attacks and got a lot of damage, and a lot of sailors were lost on that one. So, but generally speaking, that's the way the ships were named.
Okay. Was punishment ever used on ships?
So the question is, was punishment ever used on ships? You may be referring to the old British and other practices around the Napoleonic Wars, where sailors could be flogged for offenses or be subjected to other types of corporal punishment. No, in World War II, that was not a thing, at least not in the United States Navy. You could be punished, but it was usually extra duty, or if it was serious enough, it would be time in the brig. You could actually be placed under arrest. You could be put on trial and then sent back to the United States and put into prison. That's for the really bad stuff. But no, there were no such things as floggings or kill haulings or anything like that by this time.
Ben, who's 6, wants to know if there were helicopters at this time on ships.
So Ben wants to know if there were helicopters on ships at this time. No, there were not, Ben. Helicopters are something that came a little bit later. They had some helicopters in the Korean War. And after the Korean War, that's in the 1950s, so about 5 or 6 years after this. But after that, of course, you're right. Helicopters are a really great type of aircraft to put aboard a ship. Even a small ship has enough room sometimes for a little helicopter landing pad, and the helicopter can take off and land from there. But no, during World War II, there were no helicopters.
How would you load the guns that are the biggest guns behind you?
So that's a good question. How do you load these guns? So you see the barrels are kind of poking out of the turret, and the turret back there is an encasement of what happens. And there are steel chambers that run from the turret all the way down into the ship, because these are very powerful guns, which means they have to have very powerful explosive charges to make them work. And those explosive charges, of course, are explosive. So you have to be very, very careful with how you handle them. So inside the turret is going to be the main mechanism. And like this one, you may be thinking of it like this. That's not how these guns were loaded. This one has the projectile and the steel shell and the propellant all contained in one package. That's not the way these worked. These guns, the ammunition, the shell itself would be brought up from one place underneath on big, big mechanical elevators and brought up, and then they would be pushed into the barrel. And then bags, entire bags of powder, each one maybe as big as a 5-gallon bucket, would come from another part of the ship on another set of big mechanical elevators. They would be brought up, and then they would be put in behind the shell, and then the breech would be closed. Then the guys would get out of that area. And someone in main fire control, way up there, would actually be the one who fires the guns.
We want to know how many sailors could be on a battleship. I have the numbers for the USS Missouri.
Yeah, I think it's about 2,000, isn't it?
Right, 2,400.
So the question was, how many sailors are on a big ship, say, for example, a battleship? Well, the one behind me, the Missouri, had 2,400 sailors on it, doing all kinds of different jobs. That's from the captain, the guy in charge, all the way down to those cooks and folks like that. So, and just think that it's almost a small city. So they have to have not only the things they fight with, like these big guns, like the anti-aircraft guns, they have to have bunks. They have to have bedrooms to sleep. They have to have bathrooms. They have to have kitchens to feed 2,400 people 3 meals a day. They have to have a place to store all that food. They have to have barbershops. They have to have a police force. They have to have places where they can get extra groceries and things like that. So they really are a small city, and everyone has a job to do, and it's a very, very complicated thing, which is one reason that discipline and training in the Navy becomes so important.
Can you talk about the training the Navy pilots did and why they had to train in Lake Michigan?
Yeah, so the question is, so how did the Navy pilots themselves train? Well, it's very similar to the way most pilots train. And this is, as I go into this, I want you to remember this is one big advantage that the Japanese had at first that they lost and that we gained. So the Japanese don't have as many people as us, but their pilots were very well trained. The Japanese Navy pilots at the time of Pearl Harbor were without question probably the best pilots in the world because they had had a lot of training time and a lot of flight time, right? In the United States, they didn't spend as much time training those pilots. So someone who wants to be a pilot first has to pass a physical test to make sure they're healthy, to make sure their eyesight is good and all those things. Then they're going to be, they basically go to school. They go to pre-flight school for anywhere from 3 to 6 months. As the war went on, that got a little bit shorter because we needed more and more pilots. Then they're going to be taught the basics of how flight works and how to move the stick and things like that. And only then are they going to be taken up in an airplane with an instructor and taught the very, very basics of flying. That's going to take a while. Then they have to learn how to operate an airplane all on their own. Then they have to learn to operate the specific type of airplane that they're going to be a pilot for. So this process for the Japanese often took 2.5 years because that's how good they wanted their pilots to be. In the United States, at the beginning of the war, it was about a year to a year and a half process. Both sides started sort of shortening that, trying to get those pilots out there, and it got down, I think, to about 9 months, about 9 to 10 months for a pilot. Which they realized was dangerous, and the United States actually began to extend the length of time to train a pilot a little bit after that, after they started having lots of flight accidents. But that time means that's you're not able to get into the fight. So if you start the war on December 7th, 1941, and you immediately start training pilots, you're not going to have pilots until December 1942. You may not have that many airplanes for them anyway until 1942. So you have to get ahead of that game, and that's one advantage the United States had going forward is we were able to train a lot more pilots during the 1943 and 1944 than the Japanese were. And that's one of the big reasons we were so successful in the air is because we had so many. Again, you can say, well, we had 10,000 aircraft. Well, that doesn't mean anything if you don't have the pilots who know how to effectively fly and fight those machines. So training those pilots takes a lot of time. So that's a very good question.
All right, we'll take this last question is, did they have church on board?
So a question is, did they have church on board? Yes, absolutely. Every ship had some type of Sunday service, or depending on how big the ship was, a variety of Sunday services. They would have shipboard chaplains of different faiths and different denominations that each soldier or sailor could go to and receive services. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that was going on when the Japanese attacked. Sunday morning, everyone was getting ready for Sunday services at Pearl Harbor. So yes, they were able to maintain their faith while they were in the Navy and while they were at sea. And of course, that became a very important part of how they were able to identify and how they were able to carry through with the jobs that they had to do to assure American victory and keep all of us free and safe. Folks, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about this. We always have a great time sharing things with you. If you can, please donate to keep us going. Go to our website and click that donate button. If you can't, that's okay. Just tell everyone you know about all these great programs. We'd love to have as many people watching and listening as possible. And in the meantime, stay safe and take care.